They left her blindfolded at the shelter gate, tied, trembling and alone, no name, no collar, just a scrap of paper that read, "Too much," keeps running back, but what they called too much. God called worth saving. She didn't run that night. She waited, not for rescue, not for pity, but for something she didn't yet understand, hope. And when she returned to the same gate weeks later, sat down quietly and looked up, it wasn't to be found. It was to see if the ones who found her would still open the door, because sometimes miracles don't arrive roaring, they wait, until someone whispers, "Let's go home." Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The air in Pine Brook, Oregon, was sharp with cold, the kind that made breath hang like ghosts in the early light. A faint mist rolled down from the surrounding evergreens, still clinging to their needles after a night of rain. The town was just beginning to stir. Porch lights clicked off one by one, and the distant hum of an early milk truck rumbled over the frost-bitten asphalt. On the edge of town, where the paved road turned to gravel and the forest pressed close, sat Willow Haven Rescue Shelter. Its faded red roof damp with dew and pine needles. Dave Larson was always the first to arrive. At 62, Dave moved like a man who had once known urgency, his shoulders broad, his stride steady, but now wore his time like a loose coat. He was tall, silver-haired with a neatly trimmed beard, and usually dressed in worn flannel and sturdy jeans. The kind of man who didn't say much unless he had to. And when he did, his voice came out low and careful, like he was afraid of waking something fragile inside himself. He had worked as a firefighter for nearly 3 decades, and those years had left their mark. A deep scar ran diagonally across his right hand, the result of a roof collapse in a house fire that nearly took him. But it wasn't the burns that changed him most. It was the night his wife, Evelyn, died of a sudden heart attack while he was stuck responding to a call 50 miles away. Since then, silence had become his constant companion. Volunteering at Willow Haven wasn't a passion, it was survival. He unlocked the front gate as usual, the padlock clinking dully in the dawn chill. That's when he saw the box. It was tucked just beneath the wooden shelter sign, soggy on one corner where rain had seeped through the overhang. A battered cardboard box, sealed hastily with duct tape on one side, gaping open on the other, and inside it, Dave froze. A puppy. She was curled into herself like a question mark, head tucked under a trembling paw. A black cloth was tied tightly over her eyes, knotted so firmly that it left faint indentations in her pale fur. Her coat was mostly cream-colored, with streaks of tan and sable down her back and face, classic markings of a young German shepherd. Her legs were tucked beneath her in a posture too still for any healthy pup. Dave knelt beside the box slowly, heart thudding. He spoke softly, as if afraid to shatter her. "Hey there, sweetheart." She didn't respond, didn't lift her head, didn't whimper. The only sign she was alive was the faint rise and fall of her sides and the rhythmic twitch of her ears. Carefully, he reached in. The moment his fingers brushed her side, she flinched but didn't run, didn't bite. She just froze again. Dave gently untied the cloth from around her eyes. Her eyelids fluttered in the new light, adjusting, blinking rapidly. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were soft brown, wide and unsure, but not broken, not yet. Dave exhaled. Then he noticed the piece of paper. It was damp, tucked beneath one of her paws. He peeled it open with shaking fingers. The ink was smeared, but the words were legible enough to hit like a punch. "Don't need her. Runs too much. Name's Harper. Tried to dump her, but she came back. Maybe someone else can use her." Dave stared at the words, especially the last line. Use her. He felt something twist inside his chest. He looked down again at the puppy, Harper, still shivering, still silent, and saw something all too familiar, unwanted but still trying. He lifted her gently from the box, cradling her to his chest. She was lighter than she should have been, ribs pressing faintly through her fur. Her scent wasn't foul, just earthy, like she'd been sleeping in wet leaves and smoke. But it was her stillness that ached most. Not limp from injury, but from something deeper. Exhaustion, perhaps, or disappointment. Dave carried her inside, past the quiet intake room, still lit only by a single flickering bulb. He laid a soft towel over a plastic kennel tray and placed her down with the tenderness of someone laying flowers at a grave. She didn't move. She simply curled inward again. Dave sank onto the nearby bench, elbows on his knees. The shelter around him remained still. No barking, no footsteps. Just the hum of the heater kicking on and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Outside, the sun finally broke through the fog, a golden blade slicing the gray. It cast long slats of light through the window, landing in strips across Harper's crate. She blinked once, then rested her chin on the edge of the towel, eyes still watching the door. Dave leaned back against the wall. "You came back," he murmured, "even after they didn't want you." He remembered a night, 7 months after Evelyn's death, when he had sat at the edge of his own porch, a bottle in one hand, divorce papers for a daughter he hadn't spoken to in 3 years in the other. He had thought about walking, leaving everything, but somehow he hadn't. He stayed, not because anyone needed him, but because something inside him still believed he might be needed again. And now, here was Harper, left in a box, tied blind, abandoned, and still waiting at the door. He reached into the kennel and brushed a finger along her paw. "I'm here," he whispered. She didn't move, but her ears turned toward him. That was enough. The sun continued to rise outside. Somewhere in the trees, a hawk called. In the shelter, in the quiet hum of morning, a new story had just begun. Not one of rescue, but of return. Not of pity, but of hope. By the second morning, the clouds over Pine Brook had settled into a pale ceiling of winter gray. A thin sheet of frost clung to the grass outside Willow Haven, and the pines surrounding the shelter swayed in slow, windless silence. Inside, the heat hummed softly, warming the chill that still clung to the floors. Dave sat with a thermos of black coffee on the bench outside Harper's kennel, his knees creaking as he leaned forward, watching. She hadn't touched her food again. The stainless steel bowl sat untouched by the wall, its contents beginning to dry at the edges. Harper's body remained curled, not from pain, but from habit, a posture of vanishing. Every few minutes, she would rise, sniff the corner of the room, pace toward the exit, pause at the crate door, and then return to the same corner to lie down again. It wasn't restlessness, it was searching, checking, waiting. Dave had seen trauma before, in burn victims, in crash survivors, in rescue animals too far gone to understand comfort. But this was different. Harper wasn't just afraid, she was alert. Listening for something, that afternoon, a knock at the shelter's back door pulled Dave from his thoughts. He opened it to find a small girl with a pink backpack standing on the stoop, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, chin tucked into her scarf. This was Molly. She was 10 years old and impossibly still, like a snapshot more than a child. Her dark blonde hair was tied in a loose ponytail that had begun to unravel at the sides, and her oversized coat made her look even smaller than she was. Her face held the pale softness of someone who spent more time indoors than out. Her eyes, however, were vivid green, sharp, observant, and older than they should have been. She didn't speak. Behind her came a woman with a military-style duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and the kind of composed tiredness only single mothers carried. This was Lena, Dave's daughter, a travel nurse with sharp cheekbones, auburn hair clipped into a bun, and a voice that didn't waver even when goodbye loomed large. "She's all yours for the next 6 months," Lena said, trying for levity but landing in exhaustion. "I promise to send postcards and therapy referrals." Dave nodded, his throat thickening. He hadn't seen Lena in over a year. She hugged him tightly, whispered something about airport traffic, and disappeared back into the truck without another word. Molly stood in the entryway like she wasn't sure she'd been brought to the right place. "Come on in," Dave said gently. "Got someone I want you to meet." She followed him, small boots squeaking against the vinyl floor. When they reached Harper's crate, the dog was already sitting up, ears perked, nose twitching. Dave lowered to one knee. "Her name's Harper. She's still figuring things out. Like you." Molly didn't respond, but she crouched slowly, resting her backpack on the floor. Harper stepped toward the bars, silent, curious. Something passed between them, not with words or gestures, but in a hush that made Dave hold his breath. Molly extended one small hand through the bars, palm up. Harper sniffed it once, then twice, and then, without hesitation, pressed her muzzle into the girl's fingers. And Molly whispered, "Harper?" It was the first thing she had said since arriving. Dave blinked, caught off guard. Molly looked up at him briefly, the edge of a question in her eyes, and then back at the dog. That evening, Dave moved Harper's crate into the back den where Molly would be sleeping. It was a quiet room with an old bookshelf, a window facing the woods, and a faded green rug Evelyn used to sit on while reading. Molly didn't object. She sat beside the crate while Dave made grilled cheese and tomato soup, his only reliable dinner recipe. She didn't touch the food, but she didn't ask for anything else either. After dark, Harper stirred again. Not wildly, just enough to circle the crate twice and stand staring at the door. Her tail stayed low, her paws shifted in place. Her eyes flicked between the hallway and Molly, and every time a car passed outside or a floorboard creaked, Harper tensed. "She keeps checking for someone," Dave murmured, watching from the doorway. Molly, sitting cross-legged beside the crate, nodded slowly. "She's not sure they're really gone." It was the second thing she'd said. Dave knelt beside her. "You ever feel that way?" Molly didn't answer, but she reached out and laid her hand on Harper's side. The dog didn't move away. Later that week, Dave tried to coax Harper to eat from his hand. It didn't work, but when Molly entered the room, Harper lifted her head. By the third day, she was eating small bites from a spoon if Molly held it. Dave noticed something else. 2. Molly began drawing. He found the first one tucked in her backpack, a simple pencil sketch of a dog curled under a tree. On the tree, a small sign read Willow Haven, and beside it, a girl sitting with a book. The girl's mouth was drawn open. She was talking. The dog was listening. The second sketch came 3 days later. It showed a gate, just like the one in front of the shelter. But this time, the dog stood on the inside, watching the road, not waiting to escape, but watching for something to arrive. By the end of the week, Harper was pacing less, sleeping more, and Molly had begun to hum to herself in the mornings. There was no miracle, no sudden joy, but there was something close to peace, or at least the fragile beginning of it. One night, while washing dishes, Dave stood at the sink and stared out into the backyard where the pines rustled gently. He heard a soft thump and turned to see Harper curled beside Molly's mattress on the rug, both of them asleep. Molly's hand rested loosely against Harper's shoulder. Dave felt a crack form in the silence he had grown too used to. Maybe, he thought, not all broken things need fixing. Some just need to be seen. Some just need to rest. And maybe someone was finally ready to stop running. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the pine trees surrounding Pine Brook, casting long slats of amber light across the frozen ground. The cold had softened just enough to let the creek behind Willow Haven gurgle to life again, though most mornings still greeted the town with frosted windows and the sharp scent of wet bark. Inside the shelter, Dave knelt near the storage room, folding blankets for the intake crates. When he heard it, a small burst of laughter, high-pitched and bright. He turned quickly, through the narrow doorway. In the center of the den, Molly was sitting cross-legged with a threadbare rope toy in one hand. Across from her, Harper, now visibly healthier and more alert, was cautiously pawing at the other end. Her tail, once stiff and tucked, gave a tentative wag as she pulled. Molly giggled again, covering her mouth like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to. It was the first time Dave had heard his granddaughter laugh in over a year. Molly had arrived just 10 days ago, silent and clenched like a fist. Now, she was speaking in full sentences to Harper, humming while she drew, and even joining Dave for short walks in the late afternoon. There was no sudden transformation, no overnight cure, but something about the bond between the girl and the dog was unfolding in soft, steady layers. Dave stood quietly for a moment, taking it in. Later that evening, as he loaded empty food bags into the recycling bin behind the shelter, a voice startled him from across the alley. "You the one who found the shepherd pup?" The speaker was a woman in her mid-40s with wind-chapped cheeks and a long olive parka. Her name, as she introduced herself, was Joanne Vickers. She was a longtime resident of the outer ridge of Pine Brook, living in a trailer about 2 miles from the shelter. Joanne was the kind of person who always had leaves stuck to her boots and a cigarette tucked behind one ear, even when she wasn't smoking. Her hair was coarse, graying early, and pulled into a crooked ponytail. She had the wary look of someone who had raised herself rough and was used to not being believed. "I saw her," Joanne said, jerking her chin toward the road. "That dog, a couple weeks ago. She kept sniffing around this one house out on Timberline Bend." Dave leaned in. "What kind of house, empty?" "Been that way since before Christmas. Cops were there last fall. Heard it was an animal cruelty case. Some guy with a temper and too many cages." Joanne's mouth twisted. "You ask me. It's always the ones who act normal that got something broken underneath." Dave's jaw tensed. He asked for directions. The next morning, after breakfast, Dave dropped Molly off at the library with her sketchbook and a thermos of hot cocoa, a quiet arrangement they'd made since she wasn't back in school yet. Then he followed Timberline Bend past the tree line and out to the edge of a clearing. The house wasn't just empty. It was forgotten. A rotting A-frame with a sagging porch. The windows were blacked out with cardboard, and a rusty chain-link fence wrapped halfway around the yard. On one side, a set of empty metal kennels sat sunken in the weeds. Dave stepped closer. The ground near the back gate was clawed up. Dirt scattered in frantic bursts like something, or someone, had tried to dig their way under. His breath caught in his throat. Harper had tried to escape. Not once, not by accident. Repeatedly. A chill rolled through him, colder than the winter wind. Back at Willow Haven, he sat down beside Harper's crate, his fingers resting on the mesh. She came to him now without prompting, nudging his knee, eyes calm but watchful. "I saw where you were," he whispered. "I saw what you left behind." She didn't look away. He thought of all the times she'd paced the perimeter of a room, stopped by every door, stared out each window. She hadn't been looking for home. She'd been making sure she didn't end up back in hell. That night, Harper curled beside Molly again. The girl, half asleep, whispered into her fur. "You're safe. You're not going back." Dave stepped into the hallway and leaned against the doorframe, letting the words settle inside his chest like embers. The next afternoon, he found Molly sitting on the porch bench, sketchbook open across her lap. Her fingers were stained with graphite, and a gentle frown of concentration curved her brow. She looked up as Dave approached. "You want to see?" she asked quietly. He nodded. The drawing was different from her last ones. This one was detailed, shaded with care. It showed Harper standing in front of the Willow Haven gate, not behind it, not beside it, in front. And above her head were 100 tiny lines, all shaped like stars. "She's not waiting anymore," Molly said. "She's watching." Dave blinked fast and smiled. "You're getting really good at this." She shrugged, but there was a faint pink flush in her cheeks. "She lets me draw her. She stays still when I do." "She likes being seen," Dave murmured. Molly nodded, then added, "I think I do too." Later that week, Dave sat in the break room with Margie Ellis, one of the shelter's part-time staff. Margie was in her 50s, small-framed with curly auburn hair and a voice like warm cider. She'd been working at Willow Haven for years and had a keen eye for patterns in both animals and people. "You look different." "Dave," she said over a shared donut. "Do I? You smile more? Even when you're sweeping the pens." Dave chuckled. "Maybe I needed someone to rescue me, too." Margie glanced through the glass door into the den, where Molly and Harper sat side by side on the rug. "Well," she said softly, "it looks like you both found someone." The sun peeked over the hills of Pine Brook with a quiet promise, bathing the frost-laced town in soft gold. The pine trees around Willow Haven swayed gently in the morning breeze, their needles shimmering with dew. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Harper arrived, and the difference in her was subtle but unmistakable, like a melody finally remembering its rhythm. Dave stood by the porch steps, slipping a leash through his gloved hands. "Ready." Girl, he asked. Harper's ears twitched. She sat patiently by the door, tail low but gently wagging, her gaze shifting between Dave and the woods beyond the property. Her coat had filled out, soft and thick, the dullness of neglect slowly giving way to health. There was still caution in her steps, a reluctance to move too quickly, but she was healing. Molly peeked from the window, arms crossed atop the sill. "Are you letting her run today?" she asked. Dave nodded. "Just a little. She's earned it." They headed to a clearing near the edge of the national forest, an old logging route long since reclaimed by wild grass and soft mud. Dave had used the area often during his firefighter days, back when he'd trained K9 units to navigate obstacles and scents. The place now stood quiet, ringed by trees and thick brush, a perfect space for release. Dave clipped off the leash, his fingers steady, but his heart unsure. Harper stood frozen for a moment. Then, she looked back at him, just a glance, a question, and when he nodded, she bolted forward, not in panic, not in fear, but with a joyful urgency, like the weight of memory had loosened just enough to let her breathe. She ran in wide loops, legs stretching, paws kicking up frost. Her mouth opened in what could only be called a dog's version of a grin, tongue hanging lazily as she darted between tree trunks and back again. Dave watched, one hand on his hip, the other shading his eyes from the rising sun. "Go on, girl," he whispered. No one's chasing you anymore." They stayed for nearly an hour. Harper eventually tired herself out and returned on her own, tongue lolling, breath heavy but happy. Dave snapped the leash back on, and they walked home in companionable silence, her body leaning slightly into his leg like she belonged there. That night, Molly placed a new drawing on the fridge. It showed Harper mid-run, ears flapping, with a field of stars in the background, the title written above in pencil. Free for the first time. Dave stared at it longer than he expected, but by morning, Harper was gone. The front door was shut, the latch locked, but the screen was ajar, and her crate in the den sat empty. No scratch marks, no signs of struggle, just the faintest trail of paw prints in the frost heading toward the woods. Dave's heart sank. "Molly," he called, racing down the hallway. The girl came running, barefoot, her eyes wide. "She's not in her bed," she said before he could speak. "I know," Dave murmured. "Get your coat." They searched the roads first, then the paths around the back meadow. They called her name, tried food scents, even visited the clearing from the day before. Nothing. By noon, panic had turned to dread. Dave called in a favor from Chief Marlin, Pine Brook's local fire chief and an old friend. Marlin was in his late 60s, barrel-chested, with sun-worn skin and a booming voice that could calm a crowd. He drove over in his red pickup, his retriever mix Bailey sprawled in the passenger seat. "Still the quiet type," Marlin said, watching Dave pace the gravel. "But I know that look. That's the same one you had after the Avery barn fire." Dave didn't smile. "She's not just a dog." "No." Marlin agreed. "She's not." They split into teams. Marlin and Bailey took the woods. Dave and Molly stuck to town. They canvassed the neighborhood with flyers. Several townsfolk remembered Harper from her walks. A cashier at Pine Market said she'd seen a dog by the trailhead earlier that morning, sitting still near the gate. Hours passed, late that evening, as the light dipped below the tree line. Dave pulled the truck into the gravel lot beside Willow Haven. The shelter was quiet now, staff gone, windows glowing faint yellow, and there, right at the gate, sat Harper. Her body was still, her head low, front paws tucked neatly beneath her chest. She looked not at the street, not at the woods, but at the door. The same door where Dave had found her weeks ago. Molly gasped and jumped out before the truck had stopped completely. She ran, nearly tripping over her boots. Harper stood but didn't move forward. She wagged her tail. Slow and uncertain, Dave walked up beside them, heart heavy and aching. "Why here?" he asked, crouching. "Why this door again?" Harper looked at him, eyes soft, as if trying to answer. Molly knelt beside her and whispered something into her fur. Dave couldn't hear the words, but whatever they were, Harper finally leaned into her, slowly. She stepped through the gate, brushing past them both. That night, Harper didn't sleep in her crate. She curled beneath the kitchen table and didn't move all evening. Dave sat at the table, hands folded. She went back to the last place she was left. He said. Molly sipped her cocoa in silence. She didn't run away, Dave added. She ran to where she knew someone would find her. They sat in the hush of the kitchen, the soft tap of Harper's breathing the only sound between them. Sometimes, Dave thought, survival isn't about escape. It's about returning to the one place you hope might open its door again. The winter thaw came early that year, by mid-February. The ground in Pine Brook had softened beneath the boots of passing hikers, and the morning air smelled faintly of wet cedar and earth coming back to life. At Willow Haven, the snowmelt dripped from the shelter's gutters in soft rhythms. Like the old building had found its breath again. Dave stood outside the gate, where just a week ago Harper had waited, silent and unmoving. He looked down at the spot where her paws had pressed into the frost. The memory of it. Her gaze fixed on the closed door, her quiet stillness, stayed with him. Now. She wasn't behind the gate anymore. She was beside him. Harper walked calmly at his side, tail hanging low but relaxed, her eyes no longer darting with every sound. There was something settled in her now, like a stone finally finding the bottom of a river. "Let's go home, girl," Dave murmured, crouching beside her. This time, for real. She looked at him. Just looked. Then her tail gave the smallest wag, soft and slow, but full of meaning. It was the first time she had wagged it for him, from that day on. Harper lived at Dave's house, not as a guest or a temporary resident, but as something permanent. She slept by the fireplace, not in a crate. She followed Dave through every room, sat patiently while he read, and waited for Molly by the window every afternoon when she came home from school. Molly had started attending Pine Brook Elementary again, at first. She barely said a word, her anxiety like a scarf wrapped too tight around her throat. But, little by little, something shifted. She began speaking in full sentences to her teachers. She even made a friend, Sadie, a bright-eyed girl with freckles and a gap-toothed grin who wore mismatched socks on purpose and talked to animals like they were people. The two became inseparable. Molly started drawing more, too, filling sketchbooks with images of Harper running, resting, sitting beneath stars. Dave hung them on the walls of the living room, lining them between old photos of Evelyn and framed snapshots of fires from his younger days. Harper wasn't just healing herself anymore. She was healing others. That spring, the shelter took in a new rescue, a grizzled, half-blind German shepherd named Baxter. He was 10 years old, his muzzle frosted gray, his back legs stiff with arthritis. Baxter had been surrendered by a family that could no longer care for him. He snapped at the staff, refused food, and curled into the farthest corner of his kennel with a low growl that kept everyone away. Everyone but Harper. Dave watched from the hallway the first time she approached him. No leash, no command, just Harper walking slowly to the edge of Baxter's kennel and lying down, nose barely touching the metal bars. She didn't bark, didn't whine, just waited. By the second day, Baxter had stopped growling. By the third, Harper was inside the kennel with him, curled up against his side. It became a pattern. With every new arrival, shaking, defensive, unsure, Harper would approach first, calm, silent, patient. She became known as the silent counselor, the dog who didn't speak but was always understood. Margie, who'd seen 100 dogs come and go through Willow Haven, started saying, "That dog's not just special, she's sacred." Dave never disagreed. One rainy afternoon in early December, as the shelter prepared for its winter fundraiser, Dave received a call from Eli Sanders, a local photographer who volunteered to take adoption portraits. "Have you seen the paper?" Eli asked. Breathless, page 3, bottom corner. Dave picked up the Pine Brook Chronicle from his porch. There, printed beside an article about a new public trail opening, was a photo. Harper sitting beside Baxter, both of them looking straight into the lens. Underneath the photo was the caption, "Heart of Willow Haven, from forgotten to found." Dave chuckled and showed it to Molly, who squealed with delight and held it to her chest like a trophy. The following week, at the annual Winter Hope celebration hosted at the town square, Mayor Finley, a tall, balding man with a booming voice and a fondness for overly long speeches, called Dave and Harper to the stage. "We honor not only our brave volunteers and generous supporters," he said, raising a plaque, "but also a special soul who has reminded this town what second chances can look like." Harper stood beside Dave, ears up, eyes alert but calm. The crowd clapped, someone whistled, children cheered, the plaque read, "Heart of Willow Haven, Harper, 2023. Dave looked down at her, tears blurring his vision. "You came back," he whispered, "and this time you stayed." That night, as snow began to fall again, gentle and slow like forgiveness, Harper lay beside the fire, Molly curled next to her, wrapped in a blanket, head resting on Harper's back. Dave stood at the window, mug in hand, watching the flakes swirl over the porch steps, the same ones where Harper had first crossed into his life. She had been left blindfolded, abandoned, told she was too much. Now, she was the one who waited when others were afraid. She was the one who opened doors. The scars she carried had not vanished, but they had become maps for others to follow, others like Baxter, others like Molly, maybe even others like Dave. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like staying. Sometimes. The ones the world calls too much are the very ones God uses to show us what love really looks like. Harper was never just a rescue dog. She was a miracle in quiet form. A reminder that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures, but in soft eyes that choose to stay, and in small tails that learn to wag again. Maybe you've felt like Harper, forgotten, abandoned, or unwanted. But even in those darkest places, God sees. He doesn't need perfection. He works through broken stories, through silent prayers, through open doors and second chances. So, if this story moved your heart, please take a moment to share it, comment below, and subscribe to our channel, and if you believe in the power of healing. Second chances, and the quiet ways God speaks. Write amen in the comments to let the world know. No soul is ever truly lost when someone still believes. May God bless you, and may you always be the one who opens the gate.